It's Market Monday. We will discuss the biggest risers and fallers in the latest batch of ADP at the quarterback position on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. On today's show, it's a Market Monday edition of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are taking a look at the biggest risers and fallers at the quarterback position in the latest batch of Dynasty ADP, courtesy of Dynasty League Football. And Kate, let's start with Lamar Jackson, who has seen his ADP rise the most. He is up a significant amount on Dynasty League Football. He is up almost 10 spots, going from from 51 overall to 42 overall. Why do you think we've seen such a big rise in his ADP over the last month?
I'm going to be honest, this is kind of one of the biggest question marks for me because we haven't really gotten any big news about Lamar Jackson, right? Earlier this offseason, we had the very exciting piece of information that he is in the best shape of his life. He's trimmed down, which, everybody's kind of expecting that to have an impact on his overall mobility, which we know the floor for Lamar Jackson's mobility is quite high. So, what do you think it is right now about Lamar Jackson? Is it the just the hype of training camp? Is it the fact that, out of all these year two receivers that we saw break out, Zay Flowers is kind of the one that's had the relatively quietest offseason and isn't in jeopardy? What's going on with Lamar Jackson, and why are we finally valuing him properly? And I think that's the key, or valuing him more properly. Finally took over Jalen Hurts as the QB3 in Dynasty ADP, which I think is the right move because Lamar Jackson's future feels a lot more secure than that of Jalen Hurts overall.
I think that's exactly it. I think it's just he's surpassing some of these other quarterbacks that maybe have some more questions. I mean, you mentioned Jalen Hurts. CJ Stroud is another one. We're going to talk about Stroud later on this show. Anthony Richardson, who he was already ahead of, he just furthered the gap a little bit. Richardson with the injury concerns. I think for the most part, Lamar Jackson is relatively safe. Now, he's missed a couple games, in the 2021 season and the 2022 season. But other than that, Kate, he is a lock to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback every year. He's 27. He's in really good shape. Hopefully this offense, in year 2, will be even better, more explosive, throw the ball down the field more. I just think he's becoming the safest option outside of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen.
Yeah, they're locked in to him with from a contract perspective, right? That you have those kind of question marks about guys like Jalen Hurts, who, yes, got his mega deal. But I think, part of this kind of shift in ADP might be partially with the fact that, yes, Jalen Hurts, he has a ton of upside as a rusher. That he's got 2 of the best receivers in the league. But the rumblings out of Philadelphia haven't all been that he's adored by the organization, right? There have been some kind of interesting off-season narratives coming out as we saw this team crumble in the second half of last season that I think maybe fantasy managers are starting to realize just how safe Lamar Jackson is from that perspective.
I agree. I mean, I also just like the trajectory of this offense, right? I thought Zay Flowers showed a lot as a rookie. Now, the playoff game, the AFC Championship game was one to forget, but I got a feeling he's going to come back and look even better. We saw them last year, Kate, survive a Mark Andrews injury, right? Isaiah Likely looked really good. And I do wonder with Derrick Henry now on board, now Henry could steal some rushing touchdowns, but I wonder if this is just going to be a much more efficient and effective offense. I'm buying Lamar Jackson at this ADP. I'm really excited for him. And there's a pretty significant gap in the price tag between Patrick Mahomes, who's back up to QB1, who's being drafted in one quarterback leagues as a 27th overall player, Josh Allen going at 29th overall, and then Lamar Jackson down to 39th. There is a pretty significant gap, and I understand why, but I think that's a very reasonable price tag for Lamar Jackson right now.
Yeah, I'm all in on Lamar Jackson at this current value because I don't think you have any quarterback that really has that same kind of upside as a rusher, which who knows if we're actually going to see Lamar Jackson truly unlocked now that he's at, one of his lowest playing weights. I think probably since he was a draft prospect, right? Like,
yeah, but he got sick the first day. He was sick on like the first day of camp. They had to send him home.
I think he has tummy problems. Maybe that's like my suspicion. I think he has
as somebody who has tummy problems. I get it. So
yeah, as somebody who has tummy problems, I live with I just have a stomach ache all the time. Like, yeah, I can probably imagine. That's kind of my working theory here for Lamar Jackson, because nobody gets sick that often, but they do get tummy aches. So I that's my working theory. But like, in terms of health, yeah, he had a couple of challenging seasons, but like we saw last year that didn't affect his willingness to take off and run. And then complementing that, I mean, yeah, the addition of Zay Flowers, you have Isaiah Likely going into his next NFL season. Like, and this is going to be one where I think he takes a big leap forward. They lost OBJ. I think this could be a big opportunity for them to utilize as many 2 tight end sets as possible and have that dual threat. Like, I think this could be one of Lamar's best seasons as a passer in terms of efficiency. And he's already been pretty dang efficient to this point.
Yeah, and I love the fit in Todd Monken's offense. I think you're going to see in year 2 them try to be more vertical, throwing the ball down the field. And listen, there was a bunch of games last year where they had the opportunities to be explosive. I'm thinking of the game they played against the Steelers in Pittsburgh early in the year. I mean, Lamar was just throwing dimes down the field, and his receivers kept dropping it over and over again. I don't expect Zay Flowers to have the same issues. Rashad Bateman actually last week just said he's 100% healthy from the foot injury. He feels ready to go. We'll see. I just think, again, I think the amount of questions is just smaller than any of the quarterbacks that are being drafted around him outside of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and that's why Lamar has distanced himself pretty significantly from those other passers. Okay, let's talk about a quarterback who has seen his ADP drop significantly over the last month. I want to discuss CJ Stroud and his fantasy upside this year. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing more that I love at the end of a long day than sitting on my couch, turning on the TV, and watching some kind of game. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down and the NBA and the NHL, we just don't really have that many sports on TV right now. And they're just not sporting the way we'd like them to sport. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we are back here on this Market Monday episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, looking at some of the biggest risers and fallers in ADP at the quarterback position. And Kate, let's talk about CJ Stroud, who has seen his Dynasty ADP fall quite a bit over the last month. He is down from 41 overall to 55 overall. Why the sudden drop for CJ Stroud?
It's interesting because you look at the prospects in 2024 and you look at the offense, right? You have Nico Collins, who has now actually been extended, and he's tied to CJ Stroud for an even longer period of time, which that's a plus in the CJ Stroud column. You have the addition of Stephon Diggs. Like, everything in 2024 looks fantastic, but I think that drafters are finally just realizing that the rushing floor is so incredibly low. And now I have to say, like, if he's going to come and be a top 5 quarterback for fantasy football, he has to be a Tom Brady level of passer. I'm not ready to dub him the next Tom Brady, but 38 total rush attempts last season. That is fewer than Bryce Young, fewer than Daniel Jones, who played 6 games, like fewer than Kenny Pickett, who was a statue, right? Had an incredible rookie season, over 4,100 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Like, he was absolutely awesome, but he was still only the quarterback 12 despite that efficiency. They added Joe Mixon, who I think they're probably going to utilize in a workhorse role. There's a lot of things going against CJ Stroud, ranked 13th in terms of end zone pass attempts last year. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to lean on Joe Mixon inside that end zone, red zone. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons to love CJ Stroud and what he brings to the NFL, but I think there's also a very big reality that CJ Stroud is a better real life quarterback than one for fantasy.
I don't want to compare this to, I don't want to make it a Cowboys show, but this is the issue that Dak Prescott has had a little bit in like the last 4 or 5 years of his career. Dak has been on an incredible offense. It's been number 1 in scoring basically any time that he's been healthy. He's been putting up massive numbers. And while that's great, it makes him a really good real life quarterback. It's not for fantasy. It puts you in the conversation to be a top 5, top 6 quarterback. But over the course of the year, it's really hard to do it unless you're getting the rushing yards and the rushing touchdown to give you that upside, right? And maybe Stroud is more of a runner in year 2, but I don't think he's going to need to be. I think the offensive line is going to be significantly better than it was last year. No team in the league lost more starts due to injuries than the Texans on the offensive line. They have more weapons. They have a workhorse running back in Joe Mixon, as you mentioned. It just feels like they want Stroud to be a pocket passer. And in order for you to put up massive fantasy numbers, he's going to have to throw for like 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. And that's just really hard to do.
And here's the thing, Marcus. I'm looking at CJ Stroud, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so all of the pieces of the puzzle are coming together for this guy heading into year 2. But like, I'm also looking at, for example, Tua Tagovailoa, who had an absolutely bomb season as a passer, but it didn't really matter for fantasy, right? Over the entire course of the regular season, Tua was the best passing core. And I'm not even trying to be facetious here, because I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in the NFL, but I'm saying in the regular season, Tua Tagovailoa was the best passer in the NFL, led the league in passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, big time throws. He had them. He had, one of the best receiving cores in the league, but it didn't matter for fantasy because of the lack of rushing upside.
Yep.
So like I only make that comparison to point out the fact that like, you know, Tua was one of the most efficient passers in the league, and it still didn't make an impact for fantasy just because of that lack of rushing upside. I worry about that with CJ Stroud being the case.
And if you look at the recent batch of Dynasty ADP, we're seeing the gap. This is crazy. The gap between CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson really start to close. Right now, the ADP, CJ Stroud, 55th overall in ADP. Anthony Richardson, 62 overall, 7-spot difference. And Anthony Richardson couldn't even finish a single game last year. It just shows you how valuable the rushing upside is, because if CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson both play, let's say, 16 games this year, it's going to be hard to believe that Richardson's not going to outscore him just because of the rushing upside here, Kate.
And that's what's crazy. This is one of the biggest, this is where the mismatch between fantasy and real life. Because
yes,
if you're asking me which real life quarterback I want, it's CJ Stroud, hands down. But this is, you know, where the rushing portion of the game, it just really is the ultimate cheat code because scoring favors the rushing quarterbacks. And that's not to say that, you know, you want pure runners on your team, but like, you know, it's really hard. And I think CJ Stroud's just probably one of the biggest mismatches. And like, yeah, he's going to need to be a Patrick Mahomes level passer, right? But even Patrick Mahomes has an element of rushing to his game. He ranked 7th among all quarterbacks in regular season rush attempts last year. Like, that's something that CJ Stroud, I think, has the athleticism to do, but that's just never been a part of his game. Even dating back to OSU, I think he has the physical tools to be able to integrate that into his game, but that's just, he's never needed to. That's not how he plays the position.
Well, even Patrick Mahomes, look at where he's finished over the last couple of years at the quarterback position. The reason why he is ranked so highly and being drafted so highly isn't because he's not going to finish as quarterback 1 or quarterback 2 in a given year. It's just that he is so good and he's going to be so stable for the next however many years. And you feel pretty good that he's going to finish inside the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks, right? Mahomes hasn't really. When is the last time Mahomes has been the number 1 overall quarterback? Was it 2018, Kate?
It might be.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that's the only time that he's finished as the overall QB1. And he threw 50 touchdowns in that year. So of course, right. But the last couple of years,
that'll do it.
Even the last couple of years, he's been good, but not great for fantasy. So it shows you how much the rushing upside really matters, which is interesting when it comes to Justin Herbert, who does have rushing upside, who does have a massive arm, and yet his ADP is in decline. Let's discuss Justin Herbert's dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing the biggest ADP movers and shakers at the quarterback position. We talked about Lamar Jackson, his ADP on the rise. We talked about CJ Stroud's value just cratering over the last month. But now I want to talk about Justin Herbert, who has seen his ADP go down from 76 overall down to 94 in the last month. Kate, what do you think is happening here?
I think we're coming to grips with the reality that this is a really interesting trajectory that we've been taking on throughout the Chargers offseason. Let's journey back, right? Because there have been a lot of changes within this organization. They hired Jim Harbaugh as their head coach, who then brought back Greg Roman as his offensive coordinator. You'll remember that during Jim Harbaugh's first stint in the NFL with the San Francisco 49ers, Greg Roman was his head coach. And you know what they did? They ran the dang football. They ran it. They ran it a lot. They signed Gus Edwards. It's kind of interesting because their offseason moves haven't necessarily favored like a lot of high upside rushers. They have Gus Edwards. They brought in J.K. Dobbins. They brought in tight end Hayden Hurst. And then they've released two of their biggest targets for Justin Herbert. So I think fantasy managers are looking at the situation. It does feel like the writing's on the wall in terms of their offensive trajectory. And then the reality setting in is training camps moving forward, right? Like Keenan Allen, gone. Austin Eckler, gone. Gerald Everett, gone. Mike Williams, gone. It is crazy to think of Justin Herbert left on this island, even as much as I absolutely love Ladd McConkey. And we've been getting really good reports so far about his integration into the offense. It's just, how efficient can Justin Herbert be? You know, they're setting up the run fantastically, but I think there are just so many question marks about A, how efficient can this offense be if you take away all of his most familiar targets? And B, like the realization that he's going to have to be uber efficient because the passing volume, I don't think there's any chance that he ranks top 10 in terms of total dropbacks, even if he plays a full season this year.
I agree with you. And this one bums me out because I really like Justin Herbert, but there's also some injury concerns. And I also wonder, like, he just hasn't been the same quarterback since he wasn't what he did in 2021 when he threw for 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns. He hasn't been. I wish he were more aggressive. I wish he had a little bit more of Josh Allen in him, where he's going to be, push the aggressive meter all the way to the max, right? Herbert's not.
I mean, yeah, like when you're Marcus, when your second leading target over the past 2 years,
I know,
is Austin Eckler. Like, I think that was a huge symptom of things that were going wrong with the offense, right? Like when your second primary receiving target is a guy who's running out of the flat, catching dump off passes in the backfield, like, yeah, that's going to significantly limit your upside. Justin Herbert needs a little bit more YOLO to his game right now.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I'm just not sure this offense is going to allow him to do that because now, I mean, again, if we're going to project Ladd McConkey to be the quote unquote number one receiver in this offense, I love Ladd. He's not really a deep threat. What he is a short to intermediate receiver that wins with quickness and speed. They can give you a little something after the catch. He is not Tyreek Hill. He is not somebody like that's going to make plays down the field. So I think it's going to be a lot more of the same, Kate, where it's when he's throwing the ball, between 5 and 15 air yards. And it's just going to be really hard to generate fantasy points that way. And you're talking about an injury, and you're talking about a new coaching change. And we're looking at Greg Roman, who has not really been the most prolific passing coordinator in the league. I understand why his ADP has fallen all the way down to 94. And you look at the quarterbacks, Kate, that are going ahead of him. They just all have more upside with it. Jaden Daniels, whether it's Kyler Murray, right? Like those guys can absolutely win with their legs on top of their arms. You're talking about Justin Herbert now and down in the same tier as like Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's really hard to kind of look at Justin Herbert and think about all of these different circumstances, which I think every one of them has a contributing factor here in terms of Justin Herbert's ADP. My biggest question is if Jim Harbaugh is a good coach, if Greg Roman can be a good offensive coordinator, like is there a chance that maybe we just kind of see them pivot a little bit from what history has told us they're going to do? And
No,
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 no, because I think Harbaugh and Roman want to run the dang ball, right? Like that's just what they want to do. It's how they've won. It's how they've both been successful, whether it's Greg Roman doing it with the Ravens, whether he was doing it with the 49ers, back in the early 2010s, or, wherever Greg Roman has been when he was with the Bills with Tyrod Taylor. Like he's taken the air out of the football. Harbaugh's history is even more extensive that way. So, no, I don't think
that's
they're
why it
suddenly.
was such a weird pairing, I thought, for an
I know.
organization that had found this really prolific passer. And like, yes, he's had the luxury of passing volume, but like to take the air out of the football when you have a quarterback that's not like a Lamar Jackson, where rushing upside isn't a pinnacle that you can kind of build the offense around. Like it was just kind of an interesting pairing. So
It is.
I
It is.
understand this on all fronts, but I also think that, Marcus, even the fact that like Justin Herbert is losing some dynasty value, I still think from a dynasty perspective, a long-term perspective, if things don't get right, I think Justin Herbert's going to outlast Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Like you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Justin Herbert is their franchise quarterback. Like I think at a certain point, Justin Herbert, like you can't just discard him because of his head coach and their offensive philosophy. Like at what point does Lamar Jackson become, or at what point does Justin Herbert become a value?
I don't think we're there yet.
Interesting.
I'm not drafting him on that ADP yet. I want some training camp stuff a little bit. I want some news out of there. Like, hey, they're actually opening up the offense and they're using 3 receiver sets and it's a lot of shotgun. And if we hear reports of like, oh, this team is going to be under center like 90% of the time, and it's a lot of 2 tight end sets and fullback sets, like I'm going to be out, because I don't think the Chargers are going to move on quickly from Harbaugh. They gave him a ton of money. I think the front office is notoriously cheap when it comes to not wanting to fire coaches, right? So I think he's going to be here for the long haul. And if we're talking about Harbaugh being here for the next 3, 4, 5 years, running this style of offense, I do wonder what the fantasy upside is. So I don't think we're in the value stage yet. Not yet.
Yeah. That bums me out, man.
Yeah.
It just feels like such a waste. I'm still like, I know we've moved on past sort of the initial shock of the pairing, but I'm still wondering what the front office was doing, I don't know. It just feels like one of the biggest coaching philosophy mismatches in terms of I don't know, man.
It feels weird. It is a little strange.
It still feels weird. And I've had months to digest this and I'm still asking why, but most of it's because I'm just bitter because Justin Herbert is a guy who has the skill set, the talent as a passer to be fantasy QB4, QB5, like the good old days.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we'll look at the running backs. Which running backs have seen their ADP go up the most? Which ones have seen it drop? Make sure you guys are tuning in for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Maju. You can read her at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.